Hello. Today, we're looking at the architecture of survival. We're breaking down specific times when a massive, catastrophic disaster was mitigated not by government bureaucracy, but by an improvised real-time hack. We're talking about moments when people weaponized technology to save lives. Hacking the map. On January 12, 2010, a 7.0 magnitude earthquake strikes Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
The Caribbean island nation of Haiti has been rocked by its biggest earthquake in more than 200 years.
The United States is offering our full assistance to Haiti and to others in the region.
There's been widespread damage and panic as the tremors leveled buildings across the region.
The capital city was erased. 80 to 90% of the buildings in the hardest hit areas collapsed. The presidential palace, the hospitals, the power grid, and the landline communication networks were completely decimated. When the dust settled, the international rescue teams, the U.S. Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, and the Red Cross ran into a terrifying logistical wall. The physical streets didn't match the maps anymore. Landmarks were gone, roads and critical infrastructures were swallowed by debris. You had an entire population trapped under concrete and a massive military humanitarian apparatus that was essentially flying blind in the dark. A traditional map is a static piece of paper. A static map is useless. And digital maps? Digital maps need to be updated. In the disaster zone, the solution didn't come from a military war room. It came from the digital underground. It was the birth of digital humanitarianism. Within 48 hours of the quake, satellite companies like GOI made a highly unusual move. They unlocked their high-resolution satellite feeds and released the raw post-earthquake imagery of Haiti to the public internet. Immediately, the global community of civic hackers, primarily operating through an open-source platform called OpenStreetMap, went to work. Over 600 remote volunteers sitting at computers all over the world began pulling down the satellite data. They manually traced the new reality of Port-au-Prince, pixel by pixel. They mapped the collapsed bridges, the blocked roads, and the newly formed refugee camps. But the map only tells you where the roads are. It doesn't tell you where the people are trapped. To solve this, the technologists deployed a crisis mapping software called Ushahidi and established an improvised emergency SMS shortcode. They broadcast the number over all the local radio stations. Anyone trapped under the rubble or anyone needing immediate medical attention could send a text message from the surviving cell phones for free. The messages poured in by the thousands. To bridge the language gap, a digital assembly line was formed. Members of the Haitian diaspora around the globe volunteered to intercept the incoming text messages, instantly translating them into English. They extract the geolocation data and pin it directly onto the live OpenStreetMap. It was a crowdsourced feedback loop. A survivor sends a text message from the dark, a translator in New York reads it, and a coder in London pins it to a digital map. Within days, the improvised live coded interface became the single, most accurate map of the disaster zone on Earth. It was adopted as the primary navigation tool for the entire international rescue effort. When the US Marines needed to drop supplies, or when the search and rescue teams were deployed to pull a girl out of a collapsed supermarket, they weren't using outdated government typography. They were using a map that was being hacked together in real time by the globe. The hand. When a hurricane hits an island in the Caribbean, the water and the wind aren't the only killers. The real danger starts the moment the storm passes. It's the silence. When the power grid fails and the cellular towers are ripped out of the concrete, an island goes completely dark. No 911, no coordination, just a total localized isolation. In the hours after the storm, information is a currency more valuable than clean water. If you can't communicate, you can't survive. But you don't need $1 billion telecommunications company to build a network. You just need a laptop, some copper wire, and a group willing to break the rules. Enter a decentralized collective known as the Hand, Hackers Against Natural Disasters. Hand isn't a government agency. They're a coalition of makers, coders, and rogue engineers who specialize in emergency infrastructure hacking. When a hurricane wipes the slate clean, their mission is to illegally, or at least unofficially, hack a communication grid back into existence. Their primary weapon is a piece of hardware called an SDR, a software-defined radio. Historically, if you wanted to transmit on a different radio frequency, you needed a room full of expensive, heavy analog equipment. An SDR replaces all that with software. It turns a cheap thumb-sized USB drive and a standard laptop into a universal skeleton key for the radio spectrum. It can listen to, hijack, and transmit on almost any unused frequency floating in the air. But a radio is useless without an antenna, and hauling massive steel mass into a disaster zone is impossible. So the hackers had to improvise. They use what is known in the underground as a Hobo Reel. They take a cheap plastic hand fishing reel, strip off the nylon line, and spool it with hundreds of feet of bare copper wire. They tie a heavy spark plug or a rock to the end and hurl it over the highest surviving tree branch they can find. Unspool the reel, plug the copper into the SDR, and in minutes they have a highly tunable long wire antenna capable of catching signals from miles away. But Hand doesn't just want to talk to the outside world. They need to connect the ruined city to itself. To do this, they build a shadow internet. The hackers strap lightweight battery-powered Wi-Fi routers, known as mesh nodes, to the bellies of commercial drones. They fly the drones over flooded streets and drop the nodes onto roofs of surviving hospitals, schools, and on high ground. These nodes don't connect to the global internet. They don't need to. They daisy-chain a brand new invisible Wi-Fi signal across the rubble. Rescue workers and trapped civilians can open their phones, connect to the shadow network, and send secure text messages to anyone else on the grid. In October 2025, Hurricane Melissa slammed into Jamaica as a catastrophic Category 5 storm.
Powerful winds, pieces of roofs getting torn off from homes as Hurricane Melissa rips through Jamaica.
It didn't just break the grid, it erased it. Almost 80% of the island lost power. The cell towers were either physically ripped apart by the 185-mile winds or went completely dark the second their backup generators ran out of fuel. It was a state of total localized isolation.
Will cause catastrophic damage, life-threatening damage. There is very little that can stop a Category 5 hurricane.
But a communication network doesn't actually need a centralized, multi-million-dollar tower to function. It just needs nodes. As the storm passed, Hand volunteers and local citizens deployed decentralized mesh networks. Using battery-powered Wi-Fi routers and offline peer-to-peer Bluetooth applications, they effectively hacked an invisible communication layer directly over the ruins. They daisy-chained to each other, bouncing a signal from device to device. In the darkest hours of the blackout, this shadow network became the only way for trapped survivors to bypass the dead infrastructure and send out encrypted SOS pings. When the traditional infrastructure fails, these civic hackers prove that the internet isn't a luxury provided by a corporation. It's a survival tool that can be built out of scrap wire, a fishing reel, and a few lines of code. The sacrifice. The most dangerous fail state in a crisis isn't always mechanical. Sometimes it's bureaucratic. When a massive organization encounters a catastrophic error, it enters an endless loop of deliberation. And when the deliberation happens while a nuclear reactor is melting down, following the chain of command can be a death sentence. March 11th, 2011. The Tohoku earthquake triggers a massive tsunami, that slams into the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The water destroys the emergency diesel generators. The plant enters a state of total, catastrophic power failure. To understand the terrifying physics of what happened next, you have to understand how a boiling water reactor works. Even after the automated systems drop the control rods and the active nuclear fission stops, the uranium fuel rods continue to generate massive amounts of what is known as decay heat. They must be actively cooled by constantly circulating fresh water. Without the power to run the pumps, the water inside the reactor just sat there, absorbing the extreme heat until it began to boil away. As the water levels dropped, the tops of the fuel rods were exposed, directly into the air. The temperature inside the core spiked to thousands of degrees. The metal tubes holding the uranium began to melt and crack open. At those extreme temperatures, the remaining steam literally underwent thermolysis. The water split into its core atomic components, creating a highly explosive hydrogen gas. Full-scale meltdown had begun. The only way to stop the uranium from burning completely through the containment vessel was to pump something, anything, into the core to keep it cool. A scenario that could have required the evacuation of Tokyo. With the freshwater reserves depleted, the plant manager, Masao Yoshida, made the only call he had left. He ordered his team to back up fire trucks and start injecting raw, untreated seawater directly into the reactor. From a technical standpoint, this was a desperate point of no return decision. Nuclear reactors require incredibly pure, demineralized water. Seawater is highly corrosive, and when it boils off at thousands of degrees, it leaves behind massive amounts of crystallized salt. That salt coats the fuel rods, choking off the flow of coolant. More importantly, flooding the core with corrosive salt water permanently ruins the multi-billion-dollar infrastructure. It was an irreversible decision. Destroy the facility to save the surrounding population. But back in Tokyo, the corporate executives at TEPCO and the politicians in the Prime Minister's office panicked. The executives hesitated at the prospect of rendering their most profitable asset permanently and commercially useless. Caught in a loop of bureaucratic paralysis and political optics, headquarters sent a fatal command down the chain to Yoshida. Stop injecting the seawater immediately.
単独あってもいいけど、官邸からちょっと海水を使うという判断をするの早すぎるんじゃないかというコメントが来ました。で、海水使うということはもう廃炉にするというようなことにつながるだろうと、こういう話で、極力ろ過水なり真水を使うことを考えてくれと。
If Yoshida followed the order, the reactor core would completely breach. Millions of lives were on the line. So Yoshida made a choice. On the official teleconference line, completely recorded and monitored by executives in Tokyo, Yoshida acknowledged the order. He verbally confirmed that the pumps were being shut down. He gave the broken bureaucracy exactly what it wanted to hear. But off the microphone, in the physical reality of the control room, Yoshida had already briefed his lead engineer. He explicitly ordered his men to completely ignore the radio channel. He lied to the executives, broke protocol, and kept the fire trucks pumping thousands of gallons of seawater into the core. By refusing to follow a catastrophic order, Yoshida's technical stubbornness kept the reactor just cool enough to prevent the absolute worst-case scenario. He proved that when the system is actively failing, the most vital safety mechanism in the room is a human being willing to break the rules. But the corporate machinery at TEPCO did exactly what a broken system does. They formally reprimanded Yoshida for his insubordination. They cited him for violating the chain of command. The Japanese public, however, recognized the reality of what happened in that control room. Yoshida was quickly elevated to a national hero, widely credited as the man who saved Eastern Japan from total annihilation. Tragically, Yoshida passed away from cancer in July 2013 at the age of 58. What these events prove is that our greatest vulnerability in a disaster isn't a lack of technology. It's division. When humanity actually unites, when we crowdsource our survival, when we build decentralized networks of mutual aid, we become an unstoppable force. Do me a favor, hit the like button. The ultimate failsafe isn't a piece of code, it's us. Stay safe and stay salty.